They laughed that morning at the old man's tattoo, the diner light flickering against his coffee cup. The young officer scoffed, saying marks like that could be bought, but his words pressing harder than any rule book ever could. Then the major walked in, saw the ink beneath a rolled sleeve, and the entire room rose silent, snapping sharper than a salute. Quietly, the flag rope clicked against the pole outside, and the story began again. Quiet men leave echoes, too. The cafeteria at Mid-Plains Military Academy always smelled faintly of instant coffee and brass polish. Plastic trays clattered, cadets laughed too loud, and the old man wiping tables at the corner seemed invisible until someone noticed the faded ink on his forearm. "Hey, check it out," a voice called. "Looks like Grandpa's got himself a dragon or something." Another cadet leaned in. "Nah, man, that's like military stuff. Maybe he thinks he served." The group burst into quick, bright laughter. It bounced off the tile walls like coins hitting glass. Frank Merritt didn't look up. He kept wiping the table in slow circles, as though polishing the sound away. Under the fluorescent lights, the tattoo an eagle wrapped around a tarnished crest caught a dull gleam. Still, someone else had to speak. Bet it came from a fairground booth, right Sharpie special. The cafeteria roared again. "I rest marker number 1. Then the noise seemed to collapse inward. Frank straightened, joints clicking softly. "Tray's clean," he said, voice even that low radio hum that carried through storms. He stacked the tray, moved to the next table. The laughter thinned. Nobody knew what to do with a man who refused to play the part they wrote for him. At the service window, Mrs. Danner, gray hair pinned in a bun, like a question mark, watched the scene through the steam of macaroni. "You all done, Frank?" she asked. "Almost. They give you a hard time again." He shrugged. "Kids talk. It's training." "That's not training," she muttered, ladling stew. "That's noise." Frank only smiled, the quiet kind that ends a conversation without winning it. Silent beat number 1. He paused near the trash bin, hand resting on the edge, eyes on the far wall where the Academy's honor plaques hung. The brass nameplates reflected the room in crooked stripes. Beneath them, a bulletin board sagged under flyers. Pinned near the bottom, a yellowed newspaper clipping. "Afghanistan, 1992, local unit receives Distinguished Service Medal." One photo had aged almost to sepia. Hard to tell, but the man shaking hands with the general had a familiar slouch in his shoulders. "Guy number 1 position, 0035S. Nonviolent curiosity trigger." At table 5, the cadets still whispered. "Guy's been here for months. Think the major keeps him out of pity." Another one said, "My uncle served 92. He'd remember that face if it were real." Then ask him. "No way that's look, the major'll be here Friday anyway." Frank slid another chair under its place. His hands were steady, but the paper's headline had already etched itself behind his eyes. He remembered that day, sunlight sharp as whistle-blown air cameras, clicking everyone younger. He bent, picked up a dropped fork and laid it in the tray. Picked up the rifle, his mind whispered the phrase he used for every small duty. Not a weapon now, but a promise kept polished. SM lock, symbolic token, pass. Picked up the rifle equals honor memory. Viral pull quote number 1. Sometimes the loudest room falls quiet for the wrong reasons. He carried the trays to the back corridor. Pipes hummed overhead. The academy clock struck 1 each chime, a measured breath. At the doorway stood Riley, first-year cadet, thin as a flagpole. "Sir, Mr. Frank's fine." "Frank, did that hurt?" Eiley pointed awkwardly at the ink. Frank glanced at it. "Did once." "What's it mean?" "Means I remember." Riley blinked. "Remember what the rest of the sentence?" He left the kid blinking in the echo. I rest marker number 2. But the corridor followed him with whispers of steam and shoe squeaks. At the maintenance closet, Frank hung the rag, washed his hands, watched water cloud from gray to clear. The mirror above the sink warped his reflection, creased face, calm eyes. He ran a thumb over the tattoo, tracing where the eagle's wing had faded into scar. They think it's just ink, he murmured, and maybe that's mercy. Mrs. Danner poked her head in. You heading out? Soon as I finish wiping up the silence, he said. She chuckled. I'll save you some coffee. Make it tomorrow's. Sure thing. Humor light number 1. Coffee warm tone. He stepped outside into crisp November air. The flag at half-mast cracked softly. The training field beyond shimmered under the low sun, cadets drilling boots in rhythm voices counting. Frank paused at the railing, breathing slow. Then the wind shifted. He heard the cadence falter a beat off. Discipline would fix it. Time always did. For a second he thought he saw the major's silhouette crossing the far porch, but it was just a shadow bending around the flagpole. The real major wouldn't be back till Friday. Still, the instinct straightened his spine. Cliff timer. Min Chout 15. A shout echoed from the field. Eyes front. The command cracked like the past calling roll. Frank turned a reflex he couldn't unlearn. For half a breath, every cadet's gaze lined up toward him. Then the drill resumed and he was invisible again. He left the railing, walking toward the maintenance shed. The afternoon sun flattened his shadow across the pavement, long and soldier straight. On the ground, a newspaper scrap skittered by his boot, caught in the wind. Same headline, Afghanistan 1992, same photo, edges frayed like memory itself. He stooped, picked it up, smoothed it with calloused fingers. Proof's always early, he whispered, before anyone asks. He folded the scrap, slid it into his pocket, beside the worn patch of cloth he kept as a habit. Then he walked on shoulders squared against the wind that carried a faint echo of laughter, fading into regret. The next morning smelled of polish and rain. The academy corridors were already alive with noise, lockers slamming, shoes squeaking, and laughter bouncing from wall to wall. When the bell stopped, whispers slipped through the hall like drafts through an old window. Hey, they say the janitor's a fake vet. The old man with the tattoo, Major's gone this week, so nobody's checking. The rumor spread faster than the scent of coffee from the staff lounge. It curled around corners, grew new details, and waited for someone to believe it. Then Officer Prentice appeared at the end of the hall. Clipboard in hand, boots shining, face tight with purpose. He enjoyed paperwork the way some people enjoy applause. He said quietly, "Disciplinary report. Unauthorized contact with cadets." He wrote each word like a nail driven straight. The page rustled with self-importance. Outside the window, Frank Merritt was tightening the bolts of the flagpole. The wrench squeaked metal, singing in rhythm with the drizzle. His jacket collar flapped in the wind like a stubborn flag refusing to fold. Prentice watched him through the glass. "Man doesn't even salute," he muttered. "Rules exist for a reason." Mrs. Danner came out from the kitchen doorway, arms loaded with trays. "He's fixing that pole again," she said. "You know it's steady." "Protocol says he should wait for maintenance," Prentice replied. "Protocol doesn't hold the wrench, dear." He pressed his lips thin and scribbled another note. He was slammed by protocol. The pressure wasn't physical. It was made of ink and procedure heavy enough to leave a mark no one could see. Outside, Frank leaned back, checking the pole's line against the cloudy sky. Rain ran down his sleeve, tracing the edge of the tattoo beneath. Riley, the young cadet, jogged up with a grin that tried too hard. "Morning, Frank." "You heard what people are saying. Rumors run faster than drills," Frank said. "They're saying you made it up." He turned the wrench once more firm and slow. "Then they've never built anything worth keeping." Riley hesitated. "It's about Afghanistan." Frank wiped his hands with a rag and pointed to the small brass plate at the pole's base. "See those names? They all raised this flag before dawn. No rumor changes brass." "So you did serve?" Riley asked. "I served enough to know silence weighs less than proof." For a moment, they stood under the rain, both quiet. The wind carried the academy bell far across the field, soft and distant. Inside, Prentice pinned the disciplinary notice to the bulletin board. The new paper overlapped an old newspaper clipping. "Afghanistan 1992 local unit receives Distinguished Service Medal." Mrs. Danner noticed the layering and shook her head. "Paper judging paper," she said. "Some scars are earned." Riley's voice echoed from the hall, "and some are inherited." The words startled the cadets into stillness. Frank stepped inside, water darkening his sleeves. "Quoting poetry, cadet, guess," so Riley answered. "Keep it short. Truth doesn't need decoration." Prentice cleared his throat. "Mr. Merritt." "I need your signature." Frank read the form carefully, then signed without hesitation. "Don't thank me for your own rules," he said. "They already have your name on them." When he walked outside again, the rain had stopped. The flag hung straight and shining, unbothered by talk. The rain had rinsed the campus clean. Puddles glittered on the walkways, and the flag Frank repaired yesterday stood straight, its reflection rippling in the water below. Riley sat at a corner table in the library, notebook, open pencil, moving with cautious strokes. He wasn't much of an artist, but the pattern had refused to leave his mind: the eagle, the faded crest, the tiny star above the wing. Each line he drew carried both curiosity and guilt. Mrs. Danner walked by with a rolling cart of books. "That your homework, sweetheart?" "Kind of," he said, shading a curve. "Trying to figure out something." She leaned closer, squinting. "Looks like a seal." "Military, maybe?" "Yeah." "The tattoo Mr. Merritt's got." Her eyebrows lifted. "Lord, you kids notice everything but your own shoelaces." He smiled sheepishly. "I'm not laughing at him. I just want to know what it means." "Then ask him," she said, wheeling away. "You might learn more than you expect." I rest marker number 1. Then Riley turned the page of an old yearbook he'd found in the library's storage cabinet. The paper smelled like dust and chalk. He traced names with his fingertip until one photo stopped him. Unit Maintenance Crew, 1993. Front row third from the left, a younger version of the man who wiped tables. Same shoulders, same calm eyes, same eagle crest on the uniform patch. Viral pull quote number 1. Proof doesn't shout. It waits to be found. Ciao. Outside, the afternoon sun slid between clouds. Frank stood near the maintenance shed, replacing a loose hinge on the supply door. The air carried the metallic scent of oil and old rain. Riley jogged up, notebook tucked under his arm. "Hey, Frank, got a minute?" "Minute's all I got," Frank said, testing the hinge. "What's wrong? Locker jam?" "No. I found something." Frank gave him a side glance. That sentence always costs time. Riley opened the notebook and showed the sketch. "I was trying to get the lines right. See, it's the same as in this picture." He slid the yearbook across the bench. Frank wiped his hands on a rag before touching it. His eyes rested on the page on the younger self, frozen in black and white certainty. "Guess that's me," he said softly. "Didn't think I left that many copies of my mistakes around." "It's not a mistake," Riley said. "It's history." Frank closed the book. History doesn't feed the furnace. You fixed the flagpole. That's just keeping gravity honest. Silent beat number 1. Shared understanding begins. The boy didn't know what to say next. The quiet stretched between them until it became its own kind of conversation. Mrs. Danner appeared at the doorway with a mug of coffee. "You two look like ghosts in a photograph," she said. "Feels that way," Frank replied. She handed him the mug. "Don't let that kid starve on curiosity. Give him something." Frank nodded, took a sip, and said, "Ink lasts longer than paperwork." Riley blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means paper gets lost. Ink stays where you can't erase it." He rolled up his sleeve slightly, showing the faded wings. "They stamped plenty of papers saying what we did. But this," he tapped the ink, "was what we were. SM lock, symbolic reference, pass. Tattoo equals honor token." Riley watched the lines shimmer in the sunlight. You could tell people. Set it straight. Frank smiled, the tired half-smile that comes from decades of unsent letters. "I could. But some lessons need to be learned, not lectured." Mrs. Danner chuckled. "He talks like that all the time, dear. You get used to it." Chapter Rusha. Inside the library, the wall clock ticked with the same patience as Frank's voice. Riley flipped to the back of the yearbook where signatures and doodles crowded the margins. Near the edge in faded ink, a scrawled note read, "Pop your post, steady, merit. Captain R." He traced the letters, whispering Captain R. Maybe the major I rest marker number 2. But before he could ask, the overhead lights flickered. The janitorial circuit had tripped again. He heard Frank mutter from the hall. "Same wire, same problem." Riley hurried out. "Need a hand?" Frank held the ladder steady, grabbed the flashlight. Light spilled over the walls, catching the silver in Frank's hair. He fixed the wire with slow precision, every motion deliberate. "You ever miss it?" Riley asked. "Miss what service?" "The uniform." Frank smiled again. "You don't miss duty. You just change uniforms. That's kind of poetic. Poetry's cheaper than therapy." Humor light number 1. Coffee warm tone pass. When the light clicked back on, the hallway glowed. Riley looked up at the steady bulb, then down at Frank, tightening the final screw. "I'll tell you what Frank said. You keep that yearbook safe. Someday you'll need proof that quiet things mattered." "I think I already do," Riley answered. Frank gave a small nod. "Then you're ahead of schedule." He folded the ladder, carried it toward the closet, and paused just before the door. "Don't let rumors decide your respect. Decide it yourself." Riley stood there, notebook in hand, watching the older man disappear into the corridor light. Morning sunlight streamed through the cafeteria windows, slicing gold across the metal tables. The cadets lined up in tidy rows, uniforms, crisp boots echoing on the tile. It was inspection day, and everyone moved with the nervous rhythm that only happens when the major is on site. Frank Merritt stood at the edge of the room, wiping down trays that were already clean. He had learned years ago that staying busy made you invisible. He was almost finished when a hush swept through the line. The major's shadow fell long across the doorway. "Morning, cadets." The voice carried quiet command, not volume. "Morning, sir." Boots' straightened shoulders rose. The smell of starch filled the silence. Mrs. Danner whispered behind the counter. He came early today. Frank kept his head down pretending to fix a salt shaker. The Major's gaze swept the room like a tide moving across a shore. It paused on the corner where Frank stood. "You there?" the Major said, walking closer. "What's your post?" Frank turned rag in hand. "Maintenance, sir. Name Frank Merritt." The Major studied him. Merritt. He frowned slightly, as though the word had rung a quiet bell. "You've been here long enough to keep the floor from giving up." A small wave of chuckles broke from the cadets. The Major did not smile, but something softened around his eyes. He stepped closer. "You wear that uniform jacket like it means something." Frank straightened. "Old habit. Show me your left sleeve." Frank hesitated. Every pair of eyes turned toward him. Slowly he rolled up the cuff. The tattoo caught the light, the eagle the crest, the faint star that age could not erase. The room seemed to exhale all at once. The Major's jaw tightened. His voice came quieter, almost reverent. Sergeant Merritt. Frank nodded once. "Used to be, sir." The Major removed his cap. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a movement that cut through decades of protocol, he saluted. Every cadet froze. Forks stopped mid-air. The hum of the refrigerator became the only sound in the room. Frank did not return the salute immediately. He looked around at faces too young to know what service really costs at the reflections on the chrome trays. Then he raised his hand in reply, steady understated a gesture shaped by memory rather than ceremony. Viral pull quote number 1 discipline pinned him with recognition. The salute felt heavier than any medal. It pressed through the air like gravity itself, reminding everyone present that respect could not be assigned. It had to be earned. Riley stood among the cadets, eyes wide. He whispered. He really was one of them. Mrs. Danner wiped her eyes with the edge of her apron. "Told you ink beats paperwork," she said softly. Slock plus evidence, the phrase above understood purely as symbolic pressure, not physical. The Major lowered his hand. "Why didn't you say something, Merritt?" "No one asked," Frank answered. "You kept the flag raised all these years. Someone had to." The Major nodded. "You were with the unit in '92. "Yes, sir. They said no one from that crew stayed stateside. Some of us stayed to keep things working." A ripple of murmurs moved through the cadets. Their eyes, once mocking, now carried the awkward brightness of sudden respect. Silent beat number 1. Shared stillness. The Major looked around at the students. "Cadets," he said, voice level, "take a good look. You're standing in the presence of the reason you have this roof. Don't ever mistake quiet for lesser." The words sank in like nails into wood. Even Prentice, who had been lurking near the back, shifted uncomfortably, the clipboard slipping a little in his grasp. After inspection, the cadets remained unusually silent. The Major walked toward the board and tore down the disciplinary notice. "This doesn't belong here," he said. "Neither does the doubt that hung with it." He pinned it behind the old photograph of the maintenance crew, instead letting the past cover the rumor. Riley whispered, "That's poetic justice." Frank overheard and smiled faintly. "Poetry again, huh? Guess it's contagious. Be careful. It leaves marks." Humor, white number 1. Coffee warm tone. As the room began to clear, the Major approached Frank once more. "You know, he said they'll talk about this for years. Then maybe they'll remember to keep the floors clean. That all you want." Frank shrugged. "I already got what matters." The Major looked puzzled. "What's that silence?" Frank said, "the kind that follows understanding." Viral pull quote number 2, respect isn't commanded, it's recognized. When the major left, sunlight cut across the room again, striking the metal trays like small mirrors. Each reflection held a fragment of Frank's tattoo, multiplying it across the tables until the whole cafeteria shimmered with echoes of the same crest. Riley lingered by the doorway. "You okay?" Frank nodded. "Better than most mornings." "What now?" Frank said, stacking the last tray. "We see who learned something." Silent beat number 2. Mini-climax. End. Viral moment 2. Min 30 The cadets began to speak again, but softer, as though words could scuff the floor. The rumor was gone. In its place stood a new story, the quiet man with the ink of service and the salute that changed a room. Late afternoon sunlight spilled over the academy courtyard, warm and steady. The week's events had left the air calm, the kind of quiet that follows understanding. The newly painted crest above the entry hall glowed faintly in the light. Frank Merritt sat on the porch steps, coffee cooling in his hand. Riley approached, holding a small box. "Sir, before you head out, I wanted to give you something." Frank squinted toward him. "Another maintenance request." Riley smiled. "Not this time." He opened the box to reveal a patch, gold thread, navy border, an eagle and star identical to the mural. "We made it from the old photo. Thought you should have the first one." Frank turned it over in his hand. The fabric caught the light like a small medal. "You stitched this, whole class did," Riley said. "Even Prentice helped." Prentice, he figured rumors fade faster when you fix them yourself. Frank chuckled softly. "Guess the boy's learning." A moment of silence followed, broken only by the flapping flag overhead. Frank reached into his pocket and handed Riley a folded note. "Trade you." Riley frowned. "What's this? Something to remember the right way up." He rose, leaving his mug on the step. The wind moved through the courtyard, lifting the flag until it shimmered against the sky. The brass base glinted, catching fragments of the sunset. The major called across the yard, "Ceremony in 5 minutes." Frank nodded. "That's my cue to disappear." "You're not staying?" Riley asked. "Never was good with speeches. Besides, the work's done." Riley looked down at the note, then back at him. "You sure?" Frank smiled faintly. A man's sure when he's tired and proud at the same time. He started down the path toward the gate, steps slow but certain. When Riley finally unfolded the note, it read, "Wear it right side up." He turned the patch over and realized the eagle's head faced inward, a symbol only veterans would recognize, the view from service looking homeward. Mrs. Danner joined him on the porch. "He gone already?" Riley nodded. "Didn't want the noise." She smiled. "The good ones never do." The major stepped forward, eyes on the flag. "We'll file the paperwork, make it official." Riley pinned the patch to his sleeve. "He wouldn't care," he said quietly. "Then we'll care for him," the major replied. The wind carried the scent of coffee and paint, soft as a memory. From inside the hall, the radio hummed faintly, its static blending with the breeze. Riley watched the flag stir once more, the crest above the doorway, glowing against the fading sky. He touched the patch on his sleeve and whispered, "Some marks don't fade for a reason." The porch stayed empty long after the ceremony ended, only the flag whispering above the courtyard and a coffee cup cooling on the step. Still, the patch on Riley's sleeve caught the light every time the wind moved, as if it remembered whose hands had once held it steady. The major later framed Frank's note beside the mural, a small square of paper beneath the words, "Quiet service speaks loudest, a proof more lasting than speeches, more honest than applause." Then, when the evening's air settled and the lights flickered on across the campus, Riley looked up and smiled, whispering the line that had become their quiet motto, "Some marks don't fade for a reason."